Okay, good stuff.
Fab, and I'll just turn my video off because otherwise I get distracted. Hold on. Right, so hopefully you can see my screen. Is that everything okay?
Yeah.
So I'm Charlie Turrell, and I used to be at the BBC, and now I'm at the MOJ. So thanks very much for including me. Just to start, when I thought about the title about championing change, I immediately thought about how effective a champions network can be in that change. So I thought I would just give a brief background of the BBC's network and then show how that can change the culture of an organisation. So bear with me, this started off as a much longer presentation than that I have drastically cut down, and as an ADHD person you can probably understand just how hard that was to be honest with you. There we go, history. So I took over the running of the BBC Champions Network just over 3 years ago, and now I've moved over to the Ministry of Justice to start a new one. It was the fabulous Gareth Ford-Williams who originally set this network up and now has over 250 active champions. So just to start with, why was it set up? Well, in a nutshell, having such a small accessibility team in a very large organisation, which probably many of you can relate to, we wanted to create lasting change, and that can be quite daunting. But having people all across the business getting involved in that task just makes it a little bit more manageable. It's really key to creating a company-wide culture shift, and it's a great place to start and get everybody involved. So I could go into the practical information about how you start and manage a network, but there are plenty of resources around that and previous presentations that I have talked non-stop about and that I can link to afterwards. But I just thought it'd be really good to look at the champions role right at base level. So what are we asking of the champions? And that's simple: to raise the question of accessibility in every sprint. So talking about accessibility is the first step. And over the last few weeks, I've been at various external conferences and internal Ministry of Justice meetings, and you'll really be surprised at how little the word accessibility is said. The conference that I went to a couple of weeks ago, it was a technology and engineering conference, and we only had one session on accessibility, and it was the first time that anybody had heard it, including anybody hearing about alt text, which was incredibly surprising to me. And so that champion in any of the meetings might just be one of the first people to bring it up. We do tend to live in our own little accessibility bubble, and I've realized this recently, and once you find it, why not? It's really nice. But in order to bring everyone along with you, the conversation has to be started. We aren't asking the champion to storm in and hit everyone with the accessibility stick, but we really do want to get people talking. So what then? We've started talking about accessibility, and where do we go from here? So we need to make sure that our champion has all the tools and resources they need, not only to educate and encourage, but persuade and create. The Champions Network is a place where information and resources are fed through from the accessibility team. And we talk about different models, the social and medical. We signpost to great talks and conferences and blogs, and we give practical guidance on how to navigate various technical questions and decisions, and even assistance in creating their own documentation that works for them. So at the BBC, it even coach champions in public speaking and how to get the most out of your audience and how to persuade. And all this interlinks and creates a shift of culture in an organisation. And so one of the key ways in making sure your network is effective in creating change, you do have to decide on the right model that works for you. So the model, so on the screen there, you've got various different models, which I thought everyone would appreciate. There's no off-the-shelf model, and you really must understand the organisation that you're working in and the microcultures that are often scattered across there too. So for an example, in the BBC, the children's is so much different to the news and studio. Children's can be quite in-depth and everyone's talking and everything's fun and playful, and news can be quite quick off the bat and relatively serious sometimes. What I've learned at the MOJ is the design community are really keen to talk about inclusive design. In fact, I cannot move for meetings from the design community to talk about accessibility. And whereas I've gone towards the prison service and they are much more resistant, they're not entirely happy about me being there, and they're very kind of medical model focused. So at the BBC, we changed the way we ran a network a few times, mainly to lean into the change of culture as it moved. But at the MOJ, I've been spending time understanding the culture so that I can create a model that works for as many areas as possible. So what if in your journey to create this culture change, you're met with a little bit of resistance? That is something I felt quite early on at the MOJ, I won't lie, and I really needed to understand where it come from. With some areas, people don't quite see how informal networks like this would be beneficial. I think they maybe connect it with staff networks. I think just people can get involved a little bit and it's personal to them. They don't see how that network is actually an extension of your team. So I had to create a timeline of how this has worked at the BBC. The benefits on a large and small scale, in individual to groups and to individuals. And that seems to have had a kind of positive response, but I still think there's a lot of work to be done. In other areas, the approach that I've been used to comes quite naturally to me, which is eager and excited, really doesn't quite work for the culture that already exists. So I need to meet somewhere in the middle and develop it. I've gone into team meetings and I've met stakeholders, etc. But my main job there is just to listen. I need to ask the right questions and have the network find its shape naturally. You're kind of building this together, and only with the people that are in that network, but the ones that can help facilitate it and encourage their staff as well. And I kind of need to gently nudge in the right direction. I also have to consider members individually and as a whole. So asking questions like, how do people like to work? Is it hands-on? You know, do we want to do workshops? Do people love loads of reading, which to me is the idea of a nightmare, but some people just literally want links to read and then come back to me. Do they prefer to see a human element so that they can ask questions to users? I don't quite know how it's worked before, but there's been quite a lot of people that are really desperate to get screen reader users or switch users in. So I've spoken to Adley Teef, which maybe many of you have seen him speak before, but he does incredible screen reader sessions. And I'm really excited to see the reaction of those attending because he's got such a personable way about doing things. I also think about how I can make sure that the sessions that I run are accessible to everyone and meets as many needs as possible. So soft networks that develop into organically structured networks are much more long lasting. Enforcing my version of a structure straight away will either be met with resistance or be short-lived and then redundant. So at the BBC, we didn't really need to lean into champions rewards or motivation or anything like that. It's especially being a public service. So do I need to consider this at the MOJ? It is something I'm actively asking. For example, Ted Drake at Intuit has an absolutely unreal network of about 1,400 champions now. They have stickers and merchandise, and I met him at a session a couple of weeks ago, and my pockets were full of stickers by the end of it. And they actively celebrate people who are learning and traveling up the levels of their program. Will that work for the MOJ? I'm not entirely sure. So all this time while laying a foundation, I'm making sure that I create a place to disseminate knowledge in the right way for the organisation. So pushing culture change in the way that's right for everyone. Whatever the approach, I'm aiming to have a group of people that really feel supported enough to openly discuss their challenges in a safe space. If people feel safe, they will ask questions they won't normally. So confident and supportive champions will make a strong network, and that network is really key to that culture change on a wider scale. So I've learned from my own experiences and talking to others in the CAN network, which I will shamelessly plug later, that any plan that you have that starts out, it might end up being completely different by the end of it. So I've started with something that's achievable for the network, having accessibility discussed in every sprint. It's such a great deliverable. And at the BBC, we created this really cool feedback loop from the champions. So we supported them in one-to-ones. We also did various ad hoc conversations, just helping in any way we can. Sometimes the champions thought of a great project that we could get involved in, or a problem that you think we could go and discuss wider as a group. And we also provided a Slack channel for questions, or a place that's just, we can just have discussions basically, so that we can share that information across teams. Sometimes this individual guided development has branched off into guilds as well around specialisms. And I'm not gonna lie, this is my favorite bit. And that's where the culture change really starts to thrive. People have this solid accessibility knowledge. So we've got the groundwork. And so splintering off into these smaller areas isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially in large and complex organizational structures. Champions are starting to find their real passions. They're delving deeper into things with like-minded individuals and pushing change. I found recently you get two different kinds of champions. You get ones that are thinking, oh, the stuff that you're doing is far too technical, and ones that are getting frustrated because it's not technical enough and they really want practical guidance. So having these guilds are really helpful in making sure that everybody's getting something out of the network. It's also where you see these really cool new ideas come through, and the network's a great place of sharing those ideas back as well. tools and resources are either found or developed. Some champions have done some of the best resources that I have definitely nicked and brought over to MOJ, and are showcasing and going, look, this is what's possible with a network like this. And they get adapted through the organisation just through that network and individual word of mouth. So all of this makes accessibility far easier to manage, because the individual product teams now have started handling issues on their own. It means like the same old conversations that you might feel are frustrating about semantics, like alt text, link text, color, they're kind of being taken care of in this network of people that can answer those questions. And it leaves people with more in-depth expertise to tackle these bigger issues, or issues I've not even come across before, maybe in the research and development area. So as I've said, everyone's got to start somewhere. And this is why starting simple and this kind of little point for every member is crucial. So one of the things I have learned that works not only at the BBC, but at the MOJ is linking up with these other areas of the business to get extra flavours in the network. So at the BBC, I spoke to D&I, I spoke to policy, editorial, and weirdly enough, even legal, who, to be honest with you, had the best sense of humour out of all of them. And I worked alongside them with BBC Ability and the other disabled staff networks. So at the MOJ, I've been speaking to internal comms, and not only just to kind of, there's an in there of making sure that their comms are accessible, but promoting the work that we're doing and the training that we're providing. There's no point us putting wonderful training on and then no one coming. So I've also linked with MOJ Able, which is a disabled staff network at MOJ. So we can talk about how we help each other. I've got a little 15-minute slot actually on the International Day of Persons with Disability. And they've got no idea that I'm going to be plugging the Champions Network, but here we are. Those areas provide vital knowledge that help bring people together. These staff networks of these real stories about how we can design and how it affects people's ability to do their best work. And even with legal, we see something the champions are doing, and could we build that into our rules and regulations? Can we develop that somehow and feed it back? So by joining up with others, we've got this larger chance to create the culture shift. We share knowledge and resources, much like the Champions Network. And then the last bit is we do this industry-wide with the Champions of Accessibility Network. So I created this network alongside Gareth Ford Williams about a year ago, and I think it's got over 500 members now. So the network started because it was a shameless plug again in a live session of where I said, I'm doing this work pretty much my particular job on my own at the BBC, even though I've got a team of people. And I feel like I needed support in that. What was I doing something that was right? Are there new ideas out there? Is there anything that anyone's doing that I could, change and work for the BBC? And so apparently that was a lot of people that felt the same as me. Within a couple of days, my LinkedIn was full and my inbox was full, and I realized I'd made a terrible decision. But now we have 6 weekly meetings, soon to be monthly, and we pick topics to talk about as a group. And we've shared wins and moments we felt could have gone better. And over time, it's felt like this really large family and a safe space for everyone to bring the stuff that they want to talk about and meet other people. We've even had people that now know each other from this network. I didn't even know there's now a smaller group of people that are talking about broadcasting. So it's fabulous. So I think this network has been spoke about at TechShare Pro and other conferences, and you can see more and more organisations that are wanting to increase their work on accessibility. Only a few weeks ago, after somebody had listened to this network at a conference, they're now starting a Champions Network in Bupa, and they've only had a very small accessibility team before that and want to be able to spread this culture change in their organisation. And so it shows that being able to have these conversations in a space that feels comfortable obviously works to change the way that everybody's speaking about accessibility. So culture change in organisations can be really hard, but there are people who are trying to push for this, and you just kind of need to find them. They'll be in your own organisation, and if you're struggling, they will be outside as well. So if you're hoping to create some of this change in your space and you need any advice, you just want to talk, please join CAN. I will put a link in the chat afterwards, and there'll be more than enough people that are wanting to help and want to chat to you. Hopefully, I have kept to time.
Yes, you did keep the time, Charlie. Thanks. That was really insightful. Okay, great. So, if anyone has any questions related to Charlie's talk just now, please do pop them in the chat. And what we'll do is we'll address some of the questions at the end, just to make sure that we're being respectful of the time. But yeah, that was really, really interesting. So what we'll do now is we'll just jump straight into Lee's talk. So Lee, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I'll do that now.
So Lee joins us. He's a product manager at The Very Group, which is a place I used to work at as well, so kind of close to my heart. I'm really excited to see this too. So yeah, take it away, Lee.
Can you just give me the nod that you can see my slides there?
I've got it okay.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. So thanks, Lorna. And yeah, thanks, Charlie, as well. That was really, really interesting, especially because we are about to embark on that, the Champions Network within Very ourselves. So we can take loads away from that talk. So yeah, thanks for inviting me to come and talk today. As Lorna said, I'm Lee. I'm a product manager in the design system squad at the Very Group. And the theme of my talk today is going to be around how we bake accessibility into our design system. And as we go along, I'll try and justify the 5 Ds and the 2 A's title. And I can confirm that it's not, as my wife suggested earlier on, my GCSE results. Although I've been quite happy with the 2 A's in fairness. First of all, some caveats. So I'm going to start by saying I'm not a product expert. I've been doing my first product role for just 8 months now, and I'm learning every day what it means to be a product manager. Before becoming a PM, I did 6 years in UX researcher role at the Very Group, working with quite a lot of people on this call. And then going back even further than that, my background was really in trading and marketing roles beyond that. So product is new to me, but it's something that I'm very passionate about. As our design systems now, so I'm not a design system expert either. And up to 8 months ago, taking on this role, I hadn't really had much exposure to design systems. So the last 8 months, as you can imagine, has been quite a steep learning curve. And if the role that you do involves design systems in any way, shape or form, then you won't need me to tell you that they do present a unique set of challenges, almost a different challenge every day. And my final caveat is that, unfortunately, I'm not a digital accessibility expert either. So apologies if you thought you were coming to listen to experts speak tonight, but I'm afraid I'm not an expert in any of those things. But I think really interesting what Charlie was saying before, because I think in our organisation, you don't have to go back very far at all to remember a time when accessibility was hardly ever talked about at all. And if it was talked about, it didn't really go beyond the talking into action. Whereas now we're in a completely different place. So at least 2 or 3 conversations that I have every day revolve around accessibility. So while none of us are actually experts on the team, we are all learning together, and we're all building our understanding of accessibility together. So not an expert on any of those things, but I am really passionate about all those things. So especially passionate about the role that design systems play in creating inclusive, accessible products for customers. I believe that they can play a really major role in this. So today I'm going to try and share a few examples of how we've been trying to bake accessibility into our design system at the Very Group. But I'll start with a brief history of Fuse. Again, some people on the call, this won't be new news to you. But yeah, first of all, it's been around for a few years, actually, for about 4 years now. So since about 2018, we've had a design system at the Very Group. But for the first few years of its life, it was never much more than a kind of side of the desk project kept alive by a couple of people who really believed in it. So, those guys, published our first design library around 2019, a set of UI components and foundational styles that were reusable. We got those all into a design system, into a design tool, so Adobe XD, which we were using at the time. And then probably about a year later, we started, the developers started to cotton on that actually it would make sense if we, built some of these things and made those reusable as well, so that every time we were using a component, we weren't having to rebuild it from scratch. So we were kind of getting there and getting the idea, but without actually giving it that real kind of investment in time and resource that it needed. So lucky for us, I guess, is that we've embarked on a big e-commerce migration project for the Very Group. So it's only really since we've prioritized that we've been able to give Fuse, the design system, the focus that it needs and deserves, really. So since April of this year, we've had a dedicated cross-functional design system squad in place, and we've been looking at everything from, what's the vision for this design system, what's the strategy to get to the vision, how do we write consistent documentation, how do we ensure that everything we create is accessible, those kind of things. One of the first things we did as a newly formed design system team was review and try to breathe new life into our digital experience principles. So these kind of already existed as a set of UX design principles, but they hadn't been looked at in a while, and they weren't really in anyone's consciousness when they were, actually building new features for our websites and apps. So we kind of took them off the shelf, dusted them down a bit, refreshed them a little, and then we put them right at the heart of our design system process. So these principles now guide everything we do, both from a design system point of view, but also in terms of the wider design community. So here are the 5 principles that we work to. So we want everything we do to be customer focused. We want to put ourselves in our customer's shoes when we're designing and building. We want everything to be honest. We don't want to intentionally mislead our customers. We want the things that we create to be intuitive. We don't want to overcomplicate things. Inclusive, we don't want to exclude anyone. And obviously that's one of the ones that I'm going to be going back to, given the subject of this talk. And we want to create things that are consistent, so experiences that feel familiar to our customers. So yeah, the key one there, I guess, in terms of the theme of today's talk is around inclusivity. We don't exclude anyone. And in order to meet this core experience principle, what we've agreed is that every single component we release into our design system must meet or exceed the WCAG 2.1 AA accessibility standard. So that's where the 2 A's come from, the double A's of WCAG's accessibility standards, and that's the standard that we're trying to meet. So why is it important, specifically in terms of a design system? Why is it important to kind of make accessibility a key focus of a design system? So, as I've already mentioned, it's a core principle for core experience principle for the very group, and as a business we're committed to it. And I think probably over the last year or so, we understand now better than ever that a lot of our customers or potential customers have access needs, and in the past we've been the ones turning those into barriers by not addressing those access needs. So we've basically been putting borders up between ourselves and the people who want to come and engage with us and shop with us. Secondly, design systems are the foundations on which digital experiences are built. So if you've got dodgy foundations, if your foundations aren't solid, cracks are going to appear in your customer experience. And on the flip side of that, if you've got a design system that's made up of accessible components, the bricks of your wall, for as an analogy, are fully, solid and accessible. That gives product designers and developers every chance of creating, those accessible, inclusive experiences. And finally, thinking more about our internal users, it's important that designers and developers can have confidence in the components that they use from the design system. So, being transparent about how we bake accessibility into those components gives them the confidence to go into the system and use them. Right, onto the 5Ds. So we covered the 2 A's. What are the 5Ds? Well, the 5Ds refer to the 5 stages of our component creation process. So we start with a define phase. That's where we set out the requirements of the component. What is it? What's it meant to do? Where do we use it today? What variants do we need? That kind of thing. We follow that with a design phase, and we can bring in another D here because this is where we tend to do a lot of our discovery work as well. So we want to answer any questions that are outstanding from the define phase. And the outputs of this phase tend to be those reusable component designs in Figma, alongside the usage guidance and the interactive prototypes that live in Figma. We then develop and test it. We generally do this in a mob or a pair, which consists of at least one front-end developer and one QA tester. And once we've built and tested a component that we're happy aligns with all of our principles, we document the key decisions that we've made there, and we write the usage guidance for our users. And then in the final phase, delivery, we obviously publish everything, the designs, the code, the documentation, and we communicate the release. And the last thing we do is we demo it to everybody and show everybody how it works. So those are the 5 Ds. And the kind of last part of my presentation really is trying to go into how we actually bake accessibility into those 5 stages. So starting with define, we run a definition session for every component that's proposed, and we make sure that we have the right representation from design, development, product, and product, whether that be from within the design system squad or external to the design system squad. One of the really simple things that we do is that we work from a Jira story, and in our kind of Jira story template, we have all of those WCAG AA guidelines, or at least the kind of core ones. And every component we get to, we go through those in this definition session, and we get rid of all the ones that don't apply, and we keep the ones that do apply. So we've got a really clear kind of list of guidelines that we need to follow specific to that component. And the most important thing here is it's about starting that conversation early, starting that accessibility discussion right at the beginning, rather than waiting until you're at the point of design or delivery. So yeah, as I mentioned before, the design's where we do a lot of our discovery. One of the things that we do in discovery is just basically look to see how other people have made that particular component accessible. And there's certain websites that we trust because we know that how much effort they put into creating accessible experiences, and if they've got a similar component available, it makes sense to go and see how they've done things. We can learn a lot from them. We're really lucky as well that at the moment we have access to a digital accessibility consultant, and we call on her to review what we've created or what we're designing all the way through the process. But the first time we really engage with it is at this design phase. So once we've got an idea of what the component is, how we want it to look and behave, we can start getting her expert advice at that point. And we use design tool plugins. A lot of design tool plugins, whether or a lot of accessibility plugins in general, they're free to use. They kind of come as part of your design tools. So with Figma, for example, Stark's a plugin that we use, and checking the basics like color contrast ratios, focus state orders, alt text annotations, things like that are all built into those tools. So it makes sense to kind of use them at that point. Develop and test phase then. So again, we use all of those kind of freely available automated accessibility tools in the development and test phase. So it's things like Wave, Silk, Tide, Accessible Web Helper that we use, and that allows us to flag up and fix any issues before we really start the manual testing. And when our QAs do the manual testing, we're doing that with assistive technology. So we're getting them to use a variety of different screen readers, screen magnifiers, all of that kind of assistive technology, and we're actually doing the testing using those tools. And again, we wouldn't consider any component to be ready for release until we've got our accessibility expert to kind of give it the once over. And it's amazing how even when we get to the end of the process and we think that we've covered everything, she comes back and says, well, this could be better, or this could be better. Document, that's fairly straightforward part of the process. So any accessibility advice that we want to give the users of those components, or anything that's come up in design and development related to accessibility, we can add that to the documentation. And we've also got quite a lot of general accessibility guidance that we can direct people to within our experience hub or our design system hub. And obviously it's really important that we just kind of keep going back to that, keep up to date, and when it does change, we make everybody aware of it. Last part is delivery part. So I guess the researchers amongst you might have noticed that we've not yet mentioned testing the components with users. Now, I've not kind of left out, or we don't ignore that. It's because we've made a call to user test our components in situ post-release, as we believe that it provides us with a better understanding versus testing them in isolation. So because of the migration program, we're able to, at the moment, release new platform pages that include these new components with relatively small volumes of customers, which allows us to user test and iterate with very little risk. So we work really closely with our UX research team and our accessibility research partner, who is Fable, and we're able to actually test our components on the pages where they're going to live with users of various different types of assistive technology, and obviously get that instant feedback and make improvements if we need to. So just to summarize, inclusivity is one of our core principles, and we base our design system on it, and we try and base all our digital customer experiences on this and the 4 other principles. Because you're working with the smallest possible component parts of UI, developing. Oh, I've just lost my slides there. Not sure what's happened there. Sorry.
It's okay, Lee. Just smoothly sharing.
Okay, I'll share again. Sorry.
I've got a lovely picture of your desktop background.
There we go. I'm back. I've only got a couple of slides anyway. So yeah, they present a really unique opportunity to bake accessibility into the foundations of a user experience by, getting really down to the smallest elements in your design system. And yeah, if you can prioritize accessibility at every stage of the component creation process, the output, the things that you're going to get out the other end are going to be, are much more likely to be accessible and inclusive, and the experiences that you build from them, again, much more likely to be inclusive. That is it. Again, I'm not too sure whether I've gone over time. I feel like I probably have a little bit. One quick final thing before I go. We are recruiting at the Very Group. We're recruiting for talented UX designers. So if anybody is interested, either for themselves or somebody else they know, get in touch with myself or Sue's on the call, or Liz Mancini, who's also on the call today. But yeah, give us a shout, and we'll give you some info. So yeah, that's it for me. Thank you for listening. I will stop sharing.
Okay, thanks, Lee. That was really great. Yeah, so good plug at the end as well. Having worked at Very, I would vouch for, working at that company. So do get in touch if anyone's interested there. So also, if anyone's got any questions related to Lee's talk just now, do pop them in the chat again, because we're just collating them and we will get to them at the end. But in the interest of time, without further ado, let's hand over to Molly Ford-Williams, who is a UX designer at TalkTalk, and looking forward to this next talk as well. Molly, are you okay to share your screen?
Cheers, thanks, Lorna. Yeah, that's fine. I'll probably switch my video off as well, because I also get distracted. Let's see if this works. Right, can you see my screen? Okay, yeah. Cool, great. So yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Molly Ford-Williams, currently a UX designer at TalkTalk, and today's potentially shouty presentation is about whether an all-cap sentence is accessible. And spoiler, I don't know if it is. However, first things first, who am I and why am I here? I know that we're all here tonight because we want to know more about how we can champion accessibility in design, and we care about making decisions that positively impact people. And our journeys to get into the same room right now have all been very different. I grew up with my younger brother, Zach, who is an actor, as well as a wheelchair user with cerebral palsy. The older sister protective instinct I have for him has translated into the energy I want to put into my job today. So over the past year at TalkTalk, our UX team has had conversations around accessibility and typography, raising questions around the potential inaccessibility of using all caps. This is part of a larger decision process of which brand guidelines should we be implementing in our online journeys, as all caps feature quite heavily in TalkTalk's advertising and could be quite a distinctive aspect that customers trust when they're logged in, as it's the same as the billboards on their commute to work. Our UX team's concerns around all caps headings were so far based on word of mouth chats, which can be so valuable in our design community. However, without the science or the research to back up what we think we know, are we going to alienate ourselves and become a team that throws the inaccessible card down too readily? We were, however, spotting instances of all caps being used in longer and longer sentences, so we might only want to write UX character limit rules for our use of them. I thought it'd be interesting diving into this further, seeing what available research there is to help us further inform our choices at TalkTalk, as I didn't want us to well-meaningly alienate ourselves from other areas of the business due to inaccessibility assumption and lack of evidence. I'm about to run through this deck that I showed my UX team, as I think it's an interesting topic covering both insight around accessible type, as well as addressing what could be a user inconvenience or preference rather than a barrier to access. What I do know about TalkTalk's UX team is We care about inclusive and accessible experiences for our customers, and we want to get there, but it'll take a lot of trial, error, and conversations like this. I think a good question to ask before evaluating whether we should use all caps or mixed case for accessibility is whether the fonts we use themselves are optimum. After all, the choice of the font is the foundation to all reading experiences. If we're championing accessibility, then what do we mean by an accessible reading experience? So are the fonts we use on our TalkTalk websites accessible, and are they accessible where you work? What we know is that if a font is not legible, then it makes it harder for the brain to decipher, and the clarity of the letters and the design of the word can reduce cognitive load and make reading easier. People with dyslexia and people with vision impairments actually have the same requirements. They need legible, readable words in order to decipher the text. First of all, I'll go into more detail about how people read and comprehend the words we put in front of them. Rather than reading individual letters, we recognize word shapes. When we're in the flow of reading body copy, we're not reading letters. And when readers are eye-tracked, we can see that they're only looking at every 5th to 7th letter. We take the peripheral of every 5th to 7th letter and cognitively fill in the rest. If it's a well-designed font that makes good word shapes, it makes it easier to decipher the letters. An interesting thing to note is that serif fonts are designed to help people recognize word shapes, whereas sans serif fonts are designed to help people recognize individual letters. It's why very small children's books are in sans fonts, as you're learning the individual letters and learning to spell out the word. Books then turn into serif fonts because you're no longer spelling letters out and you're recognizing words. So a lot of people who are dyslexic can't get that momentum because they associate the wrong sound with the wrong letter combinations. Latin-based languages like English are audio-first languages, so readers see the word, turn it into a sound, and then associate a meaning with that sound. If you're experiencing dyslexia, then you might see the word, give it the wrong sound, and then give it the wrong meaning. But it's also important we acknowledge that English is an opaque language with its own complexities. English doesn't follow its own rules and can be hard to decipher as it is, and the font can add more complexity where people are already struggling. Some examples being the different spellings for red and red, waste, or peak, peak, or peak. So you've probably seen examples like this before, and it's a relatable example of how we'll process the word shapes and how the brain helps to decipher them rather than the individual letters. The beginning and the last letters here on each word are correct, and our brains make clever guesses to fill in the rest of the word. What will help us recognize word shapes are some of the accessible criteria I'm about to cover now. So the development of the BBC Reith font included advice from neuroscientist Dr. Alessia Nicotra, PhD neurology and neurophysiology, and they developed an understanding of how people with different abilities read, helping to define the approach to developing BBC Reith and informing which methodologies to use during rounds of readability testing. The user groups in the research included people with moderate to severe vision impairments, dyslexia, and people who didn't identify with any related condition. Through testing and identifying which letter features to avoid, they created a font which outperformed Helvetica, Arial, Gill Sans, and Tiresias. So there are many considerations to make when you're choosing an accessible typeface, and studies have been done to understand how people with different abilities read. There are a number of other cognitive traits or conditions, such as letter mirroring, which affects people with or without dyslexia. We all, as small children, mirror our letters, which is why when we learn to write, lots of us write the letters the wrong way around, for example, your S or your P, and we don't see them as wrong. Eventually, our brain learns to see things the right way around from about 5 to 6 years old, and nearly everyone grows out of mirroring, but about 5% of people don't grow out of it. But it's not dyslexia, but if you have that and dyslexia, it will make it doubly as hard to read. So to people experiencing letter mirroring, fonts can provide unique shapes between the lowercase d, b, p, and q, and this will help any reader decipher words. So here you can see examples testing the accessibility criteria of the TalkTalk fonts we use. I'll use mixed case examples for Omnes and Oswald, the two fonts we currently use, even though we only use Oswald as all caps. I've also included Open Sans, which was the old font used on our TalkTalk pages. You can see here that none of the options provide the unique shapes that would help prevent letter mirroring issues for our users. Another readability issue for fonts is whether they have unique shapes for all letters. So here's an example of Gill Sans with an uppercase I and a lowercase L and a number 1, whereas Verdana is much easier to decipher. These are called imposter letters and will be more of a barrier for readers with both dyslexia and or vision impairments. Again, I tested this with our fonts, and you can probably see that the uppercase I and lowercase L's are too similar across the board. So something else you might want to try avoiding are closed counters and tight apertures. As you can see here, Microsoft Sans closes the counters a lot, and the C can look like an O, and the E and the A are also extremely closed. Trebuchet shows a crushed aperture in the E, but has no open counters, so you can start weighing up the qualities of the fonts against each other. I tested this again with our fonts, and my opinion is the apertures are quite nice and open on Omnes, but the counters are a bit closed. However, not as closed as the counters on Oswald. Open Sans is nice and clear, however, so it's kind of funny that something used in the past might have passed more accessibility criteria. But I hope sharing these examples might inspire other design teams to test their own fonts and see what they find. A few of those slides referenced a blog post written by Gareth Ford-Williams, and yes, we are related and there's always a chance I could be biased, but he does know his stuff and I would avoid quoting him if in my career if I could, but he is a reliable and free resource. So Sue nodding, yeah. So what else is there to consider with our use of all caps at Talk Talk? Where can we go next and what can we discuss? So there is research out there to suggest all caps is inherently inaccessible. However, this research is about books and long articles. It's not about menus, headings, lists, or any short form sentences. And the impact on using uppercase will be different depending on the design of the font. However, this is also a question from me to this audience. Does someone know something that I've missed whilst researching? And that's what's valuable about this community, is a moving conversation with new research and insight always influencing our best practice. So a word of warning that there's no quick fix, and I'd be careful and suspicious using fonts or text styles with big accessibility claims. From what I understand, there's no validated research to back up the, in quote marks, dyslexia-friendly font called Dyslexie. And I've been seeing a lot of claims around the accessible wonders of bionic reading, which changes the first few letters in each word to bold and leaves the rest of the word in a lighter weight. The accessibility or inaccessibility isn't yet proven, and you can argue that it will disrupt the circadian rhythm that you naturally experience when reading body copy. This is because you're forcing the eyes to the beginning of every word, which isn't what your brain wants to do, as it naturally wants to take the peripheral of every fifth to seventh letter and cognitively fill in the rest. So as I said, I'd be suspicious of anything that claims to be a silver bullet. So back to Talk Talk, it'll be interesting exploring how we can make our digital use of type emotionally accessible for our customers. And as I mentioned before, someone who sees a Talk Talk billboard on their way to work, we want to make sure the experience they have online matches that and feels reliable. And if we think all caps is too shouty for some journeys or takes up too much room on the page, then they're also valid concerns. BBC Reith had to still look like it was British, like it was part of an organisation that's over 100 years old. Not looking ultra modern was a massive part to play in their font criteria, balancing the emotional with the technical and functional to make sure it worked online, on mobile, subtitles, TV graphics fitting within small spaces, working for print and signage. It was tested for so many uses and also had to work in 140 languages, which has all been built and delivered. It's also good to consider how our use of all caps affects screen readers, as Contact Us can read Contact US. From speaking to some screen reader users, I learned that this wasn't really a barrier, but more of an eye roll, this again, and this will still affect the emotional accessibility of the page. So in summary, is this all caps sentence accessible? I still don't know. Research around accessible design is always evolving, and a lot of the time it's up to us to interpret and use what we believe is our best foot forward. I firmly believe in not limiting designs based on inaccessibility assumption if we can avoid it, as I've already met people in our industry who view accessibility as a creativity blocker when it isn't. If it was up to me, I'd talk to brand about my UX preference to avoid all caps due to the shouty tone of voice and potential complications for screen readers that we may struggle to get everyone to keep on top of, and too much space taken on the page, increasing scroll depth and pushing content below the fold. However, it would be a totally different tone if I'd gone straight to brand claiming inaccessibility without having the research to back it up. So if we are to keep in line with brand and agree to keep all caps headings, then what's our UX character limit per use? People are complicated and the people we design for are complicated, and we're constantly learning and doing the best with what we have. And as mentioned before, short form all caps may not be an accessibility issue, rather a usability one. Accessibility is about barriers and usability is about experience. And so it's more about inclusive design rather than accessibility. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation, a little plug, but I hope it's been of some value, and thanks ladies at UX for having me here today. I've looked up to this organisation since being a student. I'm very excited right now, but you can find me on Twitter at MollyMayFW or LinkedIn /Molly Ford Williams. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, Molly. Like, that was fantastic. I like the way as well that your presentation was, styled in keeping with our slides as well.
It was definitely intentional.
Yeah.
That's a good
no, that was really interesting. And so yeah, like, and if anyone's got any questions for Molly as well, please pop them in the chat. So we've just got 10 minutes left now, and we do have some questions from the other talks as well. So I'll just pop one to so Charlie, who was the first talk. So we've got a question here. Do you have a dedicated accessibility team helping you, or is it just you working solo across networks?
Well, it's interesting actually. So right at the very beginning, it was only Beverly Newen for a good couple of years who was shouting about accessibility at the MOJ, and to make everybody feel better in this, it wasn't an easy journey to get a full accessibility team. It was a push for a good year, and then felt like giving up, and almost did, and then eventually managed to get funding. And there are 8.5 of us for somebody who works part-time, which is amazing. So you've got 4 specialists, 2 delivery managers, someone that leads, me, am I missing someone, and potentially somebody else, which is amazing. So it's actually a full dedicated team. It is really early days, so we're still in that figuring out how everybody works and how we're all interacting with each other, and we keep trying something, it's not working, we're trying something again, but it's been a really kind of long haul to get to this point. So yeah, now we're in a completely full team, which we all don't know what to do with. We're kind of going, got all this resource and all this knowledge about how we're going to start something, but it's really nice that after a bit of a push, the organisation's really starting to understand how important it is. So hopefully that team, our aim is anyway, to grow that even more with different specialists, to have really kind of deep dive knowledge on certain areas that we can kind of push that in different spaces. The MOJ, I didn't realize the MOJ was 85,000 people. We've gone from the BBC, and I thought that was a big organisation, and now it's massive. So that is my plug for more staff, more than anything else.
Good stuff. So also, like, I mean, there's another question here as well. Are you considering like design for ASD and ADHD? And can you recommend any resources as well, around designing with those things in mind?
Yeah, I think Catherine Moonen, who you probably will know potentially, is doing loads of work on inclusive design around autism and ADHD. We look at that all the time. We're trying to include neurodiversity in everything that we're doing, to kind of amalgamate both of it. We try not to separate everything, because I think talking about it from medical model and social model, you've got to look at everything all across the board. So yeah, absolutely, I can pop more resources in here. I was going to say, I popped the link for the network in there, and we're going to have a drive there with all of our resources pulled together, and so hopefully that will be organized in some kind of way when I get a bit of time, but with resources around people with neurodivergence and everything else. So hopefully that'll be a great place to find all these different talks.
Yeah, okay, great. Cool, okay, and then I wanted to ask this question as well. So this is one for Lee. So Lee, what components have you found the hardest to make accessible in your experience working with Fuse?
Yeah, so we're still fairly early days in terms of how many components. I think we're probably onto about 20 different components now that we've worked on so far. The ones that stand out, I guess, as being the most difficult, we did input field recently, so kind of your form field, and that again on the surface potentially looks like wouldn't have too much to think about from an accessibility point of view, but it's unbelievably complex from an accessibility point of view. So you've got things like your kind of error stage, your disabled stage, your your character masking for passwords and things like that, and how you handle them from an accessibility point of view. So I'll probably point to that one. I think the other thing I would say is that what we definitely are finding already, and which is bodes well, I think, only a relatively short amount of time in, is that some of the same accessibility considerations pop up time and time again in the different components. So I think once you've kind of handled them in one, it comes up in the next one, and you think, well, we've got precedent here. We know kind of how to handle this. So get the feeling that, hopefully in a few months' time, we'll get better at identifying what we need to do and how to kind of resolve those accessibility challenges.
Yeah, great. I mean, I'm just thinking on the whole as well. Obviously, Fuse has got like a big focus there, which is really great. So are you taking like the mantle on yourself to try and bake in accessibility, or how much support do you feel like you have within the business?
Yeah, I mean, say in my talk, I think probably in the last 12 months, we've kind of come on leaps and bounds, not just from a design system is one part of it, but in terms of how we're trying to get accessibility to the front of everybody's mind, from a digital customer experience point of view. Thanks to Sue and Liz and a few other people on this call, we really are starting to see some traction now. Yeah, I think in terms of the design system specifically, we're just starting to kind of open up our contribution model. That will involve us kind of working with other teams to get them to understand what we do to get accessibility into those components. And we'll expect the same standards to be applied when they're contributing back to the system.
Yeah, that's really great. It's like really good to hear all the work that's going on there. So we are coming up on time at the moment. So if anyone else has got any, sort of contributions or questions, do feel free to turn on your microphones and shout out. Or if any of the other organisers want to jump in and say something, please do. Otherwise, we're getting close to wrap up time.
There's a question from Natasha in the chat, which I don't know if Natasha wants to read it out, but it says, any advice for, hang on, the screen's moved, for pushing inclusive research or design forward in the B2B space, where it's often neglected compared to designing in the consumer space? I don't know if any of our speakers feel able to offer any insight into that.
No, not me. I don't, it's not something I have experience with, so I don't think I could offer any useful advice on that, I'm afraid. It's a good question.
It is a good question, yeah. Certainly I've noticed definitely more of a focus on it in the consumer space than in B2B, where it's sort of just less thought about maybe. But I guess all the same things that apply to the consumer apply to the business users. So maybe not thinking of them as business users, but just kind of bringing in those consumer needs in a business context might make sense. I don't know. Yeah, that was the one I just spotted.
Okay, no, great. I mean, there's been like a lot of good sort of messages and activity going on in the chat that I've been watching, so that's been absolutely great. And it's been really great to like see so many people join the event today. So I just want to say like thank you very much to all the speakers. You've been absolutely fabulous. I found the talks really insightful myself, and I'm so glad that we actually recorded the event this time, because tech kind of tech difficulties meant that we didn't in the past. So we will share the event afterwards. You should get an email about it. And yeah, so have a lovely evening, everybody. And thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye. didn't know if I was jumping off or not.
I know, me too. I was like, what do we do? A
Yeah.
debrief? Like, what we do?
Should we stay on for a bit? Have a bit of a wrap
Usually
up.
stay on and have a little debrief. I'm just
Yeah,
I'm trying to copy all the links down in the chat so that we can maybe tweet them out there and stuff. So many. Brilliant.
I've got all the links, Lynn. I've been doing it because it was jumping up. I've got them all so I can share them, because I think last time I got lost. I've got them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Should we stop the recording as well so we don't have to edit the end?
Oh, yeah.